Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you jumping on right now, we're just going to give it a couple of minutes, let everybody get in here and get situated, and we'll start at about 1 or 2 minutes past the hour here once everyone is all signed in. And being redundant here, for those of you that have been on for a minute, we've got a few people still trickling in, so we're going to give it about another 30 seconds and we'll kick things off here. Just let everybody get signed in. Okay, looks like everybody's pretty much got set up in here and ready to go. So we're going to kick things off. Today's webinar is on threat intelligence, the industry's early warning system. Got a couple of interesting guests with me today. We've got Joe Orr, Chief Operations and Technical Officer here at NMFTA, and we're also bringing in Todd Florence, Chief Information Officer from Estes Express Lines. And the conversation today, we really want to center on, first, we're going to define what is threat intelligence, why do we need it, and then talk a little bit about the resources that are available to us, specifically in the transportation sector, and how we can use those to better defend ourselves and to assist others in the industry to better defend themselves as well. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with our guests, I assume you don't need much of an introduction, but if you would give me just a quick synopsis, Joe, what is it you do here at NMFTA?
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Ben. So I'm the Chief Operations and Technical Officer at NMFTA. So one of my one of the pillars that I'm responsible for with Ben is cybersecurity. I've been with NMFTA almost 3 years, and been in the technical transportation arena for almost over 25 years now.
Thanks, Joe. And Todd, a little bit about yourself and what it is you've got going on over at Estes.
Sure. So, Todd Florence, I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Estes, which means IT, IoT, cybersecurity, feature delivery, like all the stuff. Like my wife jokingly tells folks I'm in charge of anything that plugs in. So that's really kind of my role here, and it's really about how do we blend kind of technology into the freight life cycle to provide truth and transparency in freight, both for our customers, for our employees, for the industry, those sorts of things. That's largely what I'm accountable for. You know, Joe gave his background, so I've been here 6 years, which is the entirety of my supply chain experience. But prior to that, spent 20, 25 years consulting across a number of different industries. So sometimes I think of things from a different angle, but largely just responsible for driving truth and transparency in freight.
Excellent. Thanks, Todd. Bringing that external perspective, I want to kind of get into that. And I first want to start by defining what is threat intelligence to you, Todd? And what, in the context of this conversation, where does threat intelligence fit into the cybersecurity program for you?
Oh, it's kind of the start of everything, right? We're in an interesting spot where we have massive amounts of information, lots of customers, lots of constituents who want access to information. Thankfully, it's not generally PII, HIPAA, PCI, like the stuff that you have to deal with in other industries. But from a threat intelligence perspective, it becomes paramount, right? Like for years, I've said I can't manage what I don't know, and that's acutely aware in the cyberspace, right? It's defense is always harder than offense, and we play defense in this space in most cases. So it's paramount to understand how are the threat actors evolving, what tools are they using, what landscapes out there, in addition to where are my platforms at? How are those vendors operating? How do they think about cybersecurity? How do my partners think about cybersecurity, et cetera? So it becomes this giant collaboration effort in industry, across industries, et cetera, because we're all trying to do the same thing, right? So the more information we have, the earlier we have it, the better prepared we can be for real potential or existential threats in the marketplace. So it becomes very paramount to be able to be continuously collecting intelligence across all those parameters, right? You've got vendors, you've got partners, you've got platforms, you've got hardware, you've got AI and the advances that are going on in that space, and you've got in that vendor, even in that vendor space, right? You've got cybersecurity vendors, you've got platform vendors, you've got operating system vendors, you have all of those sorts of things, and any in physical security, et cetera, any one of those things falls down creates a vulnerability for the enterprise. So the more that we can share, because you can't be an expert in everything, particularly from the threat intelligence perspective, the more prepared you can be to defend against a myriad of events. Not sure if that's what you were looking for, Ben, but like that's kind of how I think about it from an Estes perspective. You're muted, Ben.
Yep.
There we go. No, I appreciate that, Todd, and that's good perspective and a good framing of what it is that we're looking for and what how we can use this information in our operations. One of the things that we identified, Joe, through some conversations with other fleets, other stakeholders in the industry is often, Todd, you mentioned there's threat intelligence from a number of different sources, vendors and other researchers and a host of other sources. We were finding, Joe, that there was a lot of good general cybersecurity threat intelligence out there. What we felt was missing was transportation specific threat intelligence. This really actionable, how does this relate to me in the transportation space? Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you had a couple of interesting conversations that started us down this path of talking about bringing threat intelligence to the industry.
Yeah, and it's a great question because, as I thought about how we got here, it wasn't something that, hey, 3 years ago we said we are going to do this. And I think two real big things got us there. Number one, as you mentioned, NMFTA wanted to go out and look at, okay, who's providing this for the transportation area? And we wanted to go ahead and send that on to our members. And we went down several different paths. We looked at both private and public sector. And what we found is it's really not a well-serviced market or well-serviced industry. You sign up for transportation, you get a lot with auto, you get a lot with maritime, you get a lot with air. You get a lot of things that aren't relevant. So you're having to sift through that data and figure out, okay, what's relevant to you? And then what happens is you just start to ignore things. Then when something does come in that's critical, you don't action on it. The other thing is not only were you getting a lot of information from other sectors, you weren't getting a lot of information from the sector that mattered to you. It just wasn't something that, from a supply chain perspective, that was out there. It was always five things plus supply chain or five things plus trucking. And that was really the private offerings. And then what we found out, like even with the public offerings, is sort of the same thing. You get a lot of the information, but it wasn't specific to the industry that we serve. Then the other thing is there wasn't an opportunity in a lot of cases to share that. And just to get that, even from the non-private, from public, it costs a lot of money. And and in our mind, if it's something that could prevent a hack or prevent a bad actor from doing something, we don't want money to get in the way of that. We're really this is a give back, right? We want to be able to give this information. So that's kind of the first part. And then the second part of this was, so many times we would talk to someone, and this was pre-conference last year, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, I saw this, or I'm starting to see this. One example is, hey, I'm starting to see a real rise in social engineering. But if you look, you really didn't see a lot of that in the feeds that we're getting. But then someone else, as we were talked, said, "Oh yeah, I'm seeing the same thing," and that's not only from a pure cyber, but also cyber-enabled cargo theft. We're starting to see these patterns, and I think it really came, to a head at our conference last year when one of the presenters stood up and was saying, "Hey, here's a problem I'm having." And like three other people stood up and said, "Oh, yeah, I've had the same problem. Here's how I've solved it." And then one of the things that Todd stood up and said, and he reiterated it, is, "Hey, if I can share information and it prevents someone else from being impacted, we're winning, right?" And vice versa. If he can get information from someone that stopped an attack, for example, and then he can implement that, that's a win. And I think as we look at things, the bad actors are working together. They're sharing information. They're coming up with best practices. They're trying to figure out ways in. The only way that we're going to do this is if we do the same thing, right? We start sharing information. We take advantage of the early warning systems and we work together. And that's something the industry usually does in general, but with cyber, it wasn't being done as well. So this is just an opportunity to, again, when you're impacted, you want to pick up the phone, you want to call 15 people, but you don't have time. You have to fight the fight. But this is an opportunity to spend a few minutes, share some information, and help maybe prevent an attack from somewhere else.
Well, and Ben, if I'm allowed, I'll tag a couple things that Joe said. Well, or even if I'm not allowed, I'll tag a couple things Joe said. Like one, when you talk about the collaboration stuff and you talk about how the threat actors are collaborating together, the other thing they're doing is they're taking advantage of our silence, right? Like whether you're a private company, public agency, for a number of years, cybersecurity was thought of as a scarlet letter, right? Like if you got impacted or you had an incident or those sorts of things, and everybody was afraid to share. So like there's a lot of push here and a lot of commendation for what you all are doing to give us the ability to share that information in a way that is open and collegial and not litigious and all of those other sorts of things, so we can combat that gap or that kind of break in our infrastructure where folks can maybe get over the embarrassment. I mean, we see millions of cybersecurity alerts a week. And oftentimes, as a vendor or an agency or whatever, they don't report a thing when they first see it, right? Like if I'm a software provider and I've determined there may be a vulnerability in my software, I may not report it until I have 5, 10, 50, 100 customers that have said, yes, I see this or this is happening. There were things we talked about at the conference last year that we were seeing through our threat intelligence and our response systems 3, 4, 6 weeks ahead of a CVE actually coming out, right? And that 3 to 6 weeks gives the threat actors a lot of time to go exploit a lot of companies. Whereas if we had the ability to just share that information, share the response, share the attack path in a way that was like collegial and supportive, we could have shut all of that down before a CVE ever comes out.
Yeah, I think that's important, the timeliness, and we don't want to be sitting on information that could help someone else, and we want to have access to that as early as possible so we can get out in front of these trends that we're seeing. And you mentioned the Scarlet Letter and not really wanting to be public about talking about these incidents, and that was part of, Joe, when we started designing the threat portal, the threat report portal here at NMFTA. We were, that was a part of the conversation, and anonymizing this information really helps to facilitate sharing it more broadly, because it does take that fear of exposing the specifics of what happened to your company. How do you think that's impacted people's willingness to share, that anonymization factor?
I think it's really helped. Number one, whether you're publicly traded, whether you're a tanker, whether you're private or over the road, doesn't matter, last mile. There's always a concern about sharing too much information. What if your shippers see it? What if your customers? Hey, I'm a broker. I don't want it to impact my reputation. Anonymizing it kind of lets you share the information and it be for the proper intent. Nobody could take that information and use it against you. It's kind of like at the conference when we go Chatham House rules. It's really no judgment, right? This happens to everybody. So anonymizing it has really allowed people to be able to share that information. And I know one of the early meetings we had on it with CTOs, CISOs, CIOs is someone said, "Well, I want the data, but I don't want to enter the data." We're like, "Wait a minute, that's not how this works." And I think once we said, "Hey, we're going to anonymize it," then it's like, okay, that makes me feel more comfortable. I think the other thing that it does was, the big word that comes up in all these conversations is legal. What's my legal going to say? Well, if you're not submitting the name of the company, that's less of an obstacle, because you're submitting it again with the intent to help others. You're not putting the name of the company out there. You're not putting your name out there. So I think it helps reduce that concern that a lot of legal teams have throughout with all these companies.
I think we may have lost Ben.
Yep, I think I didn't know that was me or Ben. And
Yeah,
so while he's frozen in time, Todd, let me ask you a question.
sure.
Legal. That's I'm thinking legal. All right,
Yeah.
that's the five-letter word that comes up in a lot of these conversations. What advice do you have if I'm somebody that says, "Hey, I want to sign up for this portal, but my legal's got concerns." How would you address that?
Yeah, and to be fair, we're privately held, right? Like, so
Hmm.
there's SEC regulations, there's other regulations that come into play when you're a public entity that I don't have to deal with.
Hmm.
That being said, I think you hit on a lot of it, right? Like, it's anonymized information. Like, we're not asking folks to like, let's say in the worst case scenario, somebody had a ransomware attack, right? Like, we're not asking somebody to come into the portal and say, "Hey, I was completely negligent here. They got 37,000 social security numbers, and we don't plan on reporting those to any of the, attorney generals," right? Like, that's not what we're asking people to do. We're asking folks to say, "Hey, I've seen this type of attack. Here's a response pattern, or here's what the threat actors are doing. Like, here's what we're doing about it." So we can share the patterns and those sorts of things. So from a legal perspective, it should have less of an impact on the enterprise because A, it's anonymized, you don't know who it came from. And B, we're not asking for like specifics and when I say specifics, I mean detrimental information, if that makes sense.
Right.
Right. Like, and I think sometimes you say I'm more public than everybody else is. Some of that's the shield of being at a private company. But last year I was sharing examples, right, that I still share because we shared them, where we would have customers, and you hear me say customers, I don't name them, like that were having email breaches on their side, and salespeople love to click on things, right? So what we did is we detailed the pattern of the threat actors and what they were doing, how they were exploiting customer systems, what that turned into, what those phishing emails looked like, and a way to remediate that because they were starting to like sideload scripts and maybe Google Chrome and like those sorts of things, and give folks tips and tricks for how to deal with the cybersecurity, not all the like gory details of like systems and Estes and IP addresses and all those sorts of things. So it really is about partnering with and working with your legal teams
Hmm.
to explain what it is you're trying to do and finding a way of what is the information that makes them uncomfortable, and quite frankly then don't share it, right? Like,
Right.
and as long as you partner with those legal teams, it's a really good conversation. Like, it's very different if it is I did this thing or hey, I just want to share all of our cybersecurity information. they're not going to be comfortable in either of those scenarios, right? But if you partner with them, work through them, figure out what you can and can't share, like it really will make all of us better and reduce the overall risk profile for the industry.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's, those are the conversations we're having. And Ben, I don't know if you're back or frozen, so I'm asking Todd questions too. He looks frozen still, so I'll
It
keep
does.
going. One of the things that reasons we touched on it earlier was the timing, right? It used to be that if they impacted your system, they'd live in it for a couple months, could be 6 months, could be even longer. Then they take some action. And I was at a conference. It's probably been about 6 months ago, and the person giving the presentation even said, "Oh yeah, they live in the system for 6 to 7 months." And I'm thinking, nah, that's not the case anymore. Um, and I think that's the other reason that really triggered us to want to do something because the behavior is much different. It's not live in the system, gather a bunch of information, and then do a ransomware, then take action. How do you think that the behavior and the patterns have made this early warning system even more critical than what it was before?
Yeah, and to be fair, I think the patterns have bifurcated, right?
Mhm.
Like if you're dealing with a nation state, like when we're having skirmishes in the Middle East, you've got Russia invading Ukraine, etc. If you're dealing with a government-sponsored entity from a country we're not so friendly with, we'll leave it at that. Like, yeah, they might sit in your system for months, right? Because they're gathering intel and they're thinking about how do I impact the industry as a whole? They're really hard to deal with, let's be honest. They've got more resources than any of us. Like they've got time, they think about things differently, etc. Not saying you shouldn't focus on that, but to your point, that's not the biggest risk we see every day. Like ransomware and cyber threats and threat actors, it's a money-making enterprise, right? They are trying to make money. Most of what we see are smash and grab attempts, which is what I call them, right? Like you see those videos of somebody runs into a jewelry store and breaks the case, grabs everything they can and
Yeah.
runs out. That's really what they're trying to do. Like we've seen system takeover like go from months of intel and all this sort of stuff to minutes, right? And so the more information we can share as participants in the industry and cybersecurity practitioners, that ability to proactively respond to those things because you heard about somebody else who had that issue, right, is worth millions of dollars. Like we've seen email attacks, email incidents, those sorts of things where you find out 3 weeks later. Like we had one soup to nuts, the one I was actually talking about, from incident to resolution was 9 minutes. When
And how
the
much data could they possibly get in that nine
oh
minutes? Could
well,
they?
that's a little bit of where I'm headed, right? Like
Okay.
from our alert to shutting everything down, have everything cleared was 9 minutes, right? Like, and
Hmm.
we all have somebody in our environment that clicks on the wrong thing and logs into the wrong thing, etc. The reports 3 weeks later where people were going from that to full ransomware incidents in 15,
No.
right? Like, because the smash and grab actors, they're smart, they're fast, they're leveraging AI, and they're shotgunning everybody. So they're just looking for those vulnerabilities and where they get in, and they know when they get in, they've got to go fast. So the scripts are preloaded, they've got their path. If that path doesn't work, they kind of stop, right? Because it's now not worth their effort because somebody else hasn't blocked that path. So you're down into seconds and minutes are starting to matter. And to your point, if we're sifting through and trying to figure something out for an hour, like we may have already lost. So a lot of this stuff is about how quickly can I respond? How quick, like it's all the other stuff, right? Like zero trust, segmentation, all of those sorts of things that we're all doing. But the threat actors are probing all of those things. They're leveraging the tools. They sound like Americans now. The emails are written very well. Their attack vectors are all scripted. They know what tools we all use. Like we see when they come in and they try to do a scan, right? And sometimes you allow it to go a little bit longer because you've got it isolated and you want to understand the attack pattern, all those sorts of things. They're looking for known tools on the machine, and sometimes they'll find a known tool and they'll stop. Sometimes they find a known tool and they turn left because they know the exploit for that tool, right? Like those sorts of things. So the more information we have, the earlier we have it, the more proactively, the faster we can respond to an incident and prevent it from becoming all full out like cyber issue.
And you made mention of the smash and grab. I know
Yeah.
I've got shotgun approach, kind of the you just spray and pray type approach. With that, how does that change? So I think a lot of times people say, "Hey, I'm not a big company. I don't need to sign up for the threat intelligence portal because a bad actor is not going to come after me." But with this smash and grab approach, how does that change the mindset of who should sign up for the threat intelligence portal?
I think it changes the mindset to it should be everybody, right? Like, because particularly those folks that don't have like a large IT shop or a big cybersecurity spend, this might be a very much more targeted place for you to get information. Because to your point, I probably start my day with 10 different cybersecurity emails that I get, right? That's the list of today's biggest threats, right? There's a bit of a Venn diagram, but there's also things that don't overlap, right? Like,
Right.
so, and that's trying to get lots of information in. If you don't have resources and you don't like, and I have a team of people that deal with it, right? Like, if you don't have that, like real world examples from how the supply chain is getting hit, and quite frankly, we all use a lot of the same vendors and a lot of the same software,
All
right?
right.
So it's going to be much more targeted to what you're using. Because to your point, if you think of like in 2023 when we had a ransomware event, during our ransomware event, Cisco and Citrix both had like major 0 day issues. And I kind of, in hindsight, maybe not while it was happening, made the joke that like at least I'm not dealing with those, right? Because we had our system shut off, right? But if I don't know, you're using whatever email platform you're using, that email platform has a CVE released and you don't see it, like you're probably more at risk because you don't have the teams that are looking for it. You may not have all of the tooling for DLP and all the other stuff that we've got in place. And it really is just a scripted shotgun approach. Like if you think of like Microsoft's famous for Patch Tuesday, right?
Hmm.
Well, they release what they're patching and the patches. And now threat actors use AI to deconstruct the patches and what they're releasing for, and then just go look for anybody who hasn't patched their system. And they have all the information they need to potentially not like obviously not always, or we'd all be screwed, but like to be able to reverse engineer what those exploits are and go attack anybody that hasn't patched. Like even in our ransomware event, like they had no idea who we were, right? Until they get it. And they don't care because they're looking for businesses, they're looking for people who are likely to pay, they're looking to impact your business so that they can make money, and they don't care who you are, they don't care how big you are. Again, nation states and all that stuff is probably a little bit different, but it used to be that strategy of how do they say it? Security through obscurity, but that doesn't really exist anymore because we're all connected, we're all interconnected. And even if you're a small carrier, a small provider, a small 3PL, whatever it is, you're connected to people who aren't. And if those folks get impacted, it can flow down into your systems, particularly if you don't have the intelligence, the systems, the threat walls to be able to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up a really good point. I know I asked the question, I don't know if it was last year, year before the cyber conference, how many people, and it's not only the big platforms, the Microsofts, the Cisco's, but in this industry, a lot of people could share TMSs, could share ELD providers, could share asset tracking. And I know that, by the way, you're the one that brought up 2023, not me. I wasn't going to bring that up. But,
That's
when that
it's hard to
when that
talk about cyber.
happened,
it's hard to talk about
I
cybersecurity
know.
without like saying, unless I
Yeah.
never hit that. But
But when, that got brought up, and then there was another one that came shortly thereafter. I think the first I was at a carrier site, and the carrier asked me, "Hey, do you know how they got in?" Because their biggest concern was we all share so much of this software. I'm afraid that it's something we all utilize. And it's not always the Cisco's, the Salesforce, or what have you. It could be something just specific to the transportation industry. And we also get
well, and if you,
inquiries like, hey, I heard so and so's got this vulnerability. Do you know anything about it? So your comments there?
yeah. Well, and it's yes, it is the easy comment to make, right? Like there's only been so many ELD providers. There's particularly in LTL, there's only so many like TMSs, those sorts of things, right? We all share platforms for data sharing. We work with the same 3PLs, like all of that sort of stuff. And it's easy to think like I guess if you're going to think about it, and maybe I'm wrong, it's easy to think about those things.
Hmm.
It's also easy to forget all of the other connected things, scales, dimensioners, fuel islands, fuel car, like all of those things are IoT devices. They're all interconnected. They all create wonderful value for the industry, but they all also create connected devices and exploits and ways in. We probably like, I wouldn't even know. This is the thing I don't know, but we probably use similar security providers for physical security, right? Like video camera systems and those sorts of things. So you're absolutely right. Like it runs the gamut of very big established providers that everybody can name, all the way down to like startups that are specifically targeting a niche in the industry that everybody's using, that are trying to move fast and grow. So there's lots of overlap there, and then it extends out into physical devices, the physical world. How do we share data and information? All of those sorts of things.
What do you think? You mentioned a couple questions ago the vendor responsibility of this. One of the things that we've discussed is what if a vendor wants to set up or wants to sign up for the early warning system? And again, we've got a lot of these leads through our freight fraud prevention hub, and a lot of the vendors have signed up for it, and I believe they have really positive intentions. How should we think of a vendor signing up for the early warning system?
Yeah, to me, I'm all for it. And you may recall, and may or may not have just shared it on my behalf. Like I could have cared if it was anonymous, right? Like,
Hmm.
um, when you start bringing vendors in the mix, then I would have been very much on the anonymity side.
Hmm.
Um, as long as they come in with the intent and follow kind of the terms of what we're trying to do, I think it's great, right? Like the more information we can share, what would become interesting is if they tried to use it as a platform to market
Yeah.
or start responding to things with like, hey, we see this attack. Have you thought about buying this? Like that's where it starts to lose value because it was really intended for practitioners, right? To be able to share insights and thoughts and those sorts of things. So you just have to make sure it doesn't become a marketing vehicle. And I will tell you, like lots of my cybersecurity vendors, I get daily emails from them of daily security alerts and all those sorts of things. And like the marketing is constrained to like the header and footer, right? They don't take each threat and be like, well, if you worked with us on this threat wouldn't be an issue. They tend to operate in very good faith, which is why I tend to not have any issue with it. That would just be the one caveat I would say in whatever the terms are. And since like you and Ben kind of hold the golden keys, so to speak, you can always boot them out if they start doing that. That would be my only concern, right? Like, but I don't suspect any of them would do that. And if the goal here is for all of us to get stronger and better, sharing more information never hurts anybody. I mean, maybe it improves their platforms ultimately.
Yeah, and when I say vendors, could be a camera provider, an ELD provider, could be an OEM. I know that, part of my frustration, it's been maybe more the past couple of days, but it's been there is, it's the opposite. It's when a vendor doesn't share information, right? Or, they kind of try to hide it, and say, hey, you need to patch this, but don't explain exactly why they want to patch it. I think the more we can be transparent, and put things like that in the early warning system. And then, you have the information, you're armed with that information. You can decide whether it's on the asset side, non-asset side. Okay, this is something we need to take action on. And that's been sort of our mindset is, hey, if you want to sign up for it and contribute, that's fine. If you're going to sign up for it and not contribute, that's a concern that we have.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense to me.
So how do you said you get a lot of these. How do you and your team, when you do get something from this early warning system or any early warning system, what action do you take? How do you what is the process that you utilize to get the most out of this information?
Yeah, so we have a small team of cybersecurity analysts, right, that aggregate this information. We also have a third-party partner that aggregates all of our alerts and provides us
Mhm.
insight as to what's happening to us as well, right? Like, so often, if it's software we use, if it's attack patterns that like we think could impact us, those sorts of things. So that's kind of that first layer of review. Because if somebody, I don't know, we're not a Mac shop, right? Like, so if there's a big exploit on Macs, etc., what do we do? Nothing, right? Like, because there's not much for us to do about it. But if it is something that can impact software, we have those sorts of things. Then we start stepping through. Okay, like what's the threat? Where are we at? What remediates the threat? Like if you stay in the software space for a second, like a lot of them, quite frankly, are remediated by making sure you're on the current version, current patch level, right? So those analyst job, that's what they do, right? Like they go through all
Mhm.
this information on a daily basis. They compare it to kind of like our technology inventory, our portfolio, et cetera, and then leverage like what are the next steps that we may or may not need to do. Like, and in some cases, it is you'll see just-in-time training go out because you alluded to it before. This year specifically, we've seen lots of very sophisticated social engineering attempts, right? So we um, we keep all of that in the funnel. We do just-in-time training if we need to send out alerts, do some of those sorts of things to be able to prevent that. So it just allows us to target our limited set of resources on the things that might be the biggest threat, right? So it's like any risk analysis anybody would do,
Mhm.
but apparently it doesn't account for large storms and power outages. Just to
Either
out,
that
just
or,
to outband a little bit.
yeah, either that or ignoring your cell phone bill or upsetting the right bad actor who's now targeting your home. I don't know which it is, but yeah, Ben is having storms, so he is quote unquote dead in the water. So we'll keep going.
Yep.
How does the approach, let's say you're the head of IT at a 10 to 20 person shop. How does your approach to the early warning system at Estes, how would it be different if you're at a smaller company? What what
Yeah.
what advice would you give to a small company that's signing up for these events?
Yeah. In theory, your footprint's probably smaller, right? Like there's
Mhm.
less doors coming in, that sort of stuff. I would very much focus on what software do you have, understanding all of the access points to your network, not simply saying, because in a lot of cases, a lot of your software is going to be cloud delivered, provider delivered, et cetera, because you don't have shops to like build your own. Um, Not simply burying your head in the sand and saying, well, it's my provider's problem, because it's your problem the minute it happens, right? So you do need to maintain awareness, and I would build strong relationships with any of those partners that you have. because you're going to need their help. And you don't want to try to build that relationship once you need their help. And then there's all the normal cybersecurity stuff, right? Like make sure your data is encrypted at rest and in transit, make sure you've got immutable backups, all of those sorts of things. But make sure you're thinking about it from the business perspective, because you could spend a lot of time, energy, and dollars that are going to be very scarce in that environment on something that doesn't actually matter, right? Like, and I
Right.
don't, and I mean that from a business perspective, right? Like it's just a thing that's always there. Yeah, up until the minute it's not, right? Like if you've got to shut your email off, your entire business gets really jumpy really quick. And you may have been thinking about your accounting system. Like if you're a freight operator, I'm not saying the accounting systems aren't important. They're not my first priority, right? Like my bigger priorities are my communication channels, my ability to communicate with customers, my ability to quote, pick up and move freight, like all of those sorts of things. If I had, it's not ideal, but if I had to delay my invoices, I'd rather delay my invoices than not be able to pick up freight, right? Like kind of,
Right.
and you need to think about it from that business perspective, because A, that's how you get it funded, but B, that's what matters, right? The other thing I would say is know very acutely which data is the most impactful. One to the business, and then two from a legal perspective, right? And they, I'll be honest, likely don't overlap in our industry. Like financial
Right.
services, completely different animals, right? Like it overlaps completely. But in the freight world, and this is not me saying like that, like shipment information and those things are important, shouldn't be protected and are confidential. But from a legal perspective, they're generally not PII, like personally identifiable information. They're generally, there's not credit information, there's not health information. So your regulatory frameworks don't support you in quite the same way. But that data is vitally important to your customers. They don't want it getting out, and it is extremely important to you to be able to continue to operate. So you need to think about it through both factors.
And I know Ben and I've we've been just finished authoring a guidebook that we're going to make public soon, and part of that was doing an article. We were reviewing the article, and a comment was made about, hey, make sure leadership is involved in this discussion. And I said, hey, let's expand upon that. Who is leadership? Is it IT leadership? And I knew that, the answer I was looking for, but you made mention of it too. When something comes in and you think, okay, this may impact us, who prioritizes, who drives the discussion, who owns it? What all groups are involved? Who are your key stakeholders? Who has a seat at that table?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the way you phrase the question, like the answer is different for each thing a little bit, right? Like,
Okay.
and it could be different for different types of things. But generically, like my team's own driving, right? Like, because we're the ones that are seeing it, we're seeing that kind of stuff. Prioritization wise, though, like from a risk perspective, we can allocate risk. We can tell you how likely is it to happen, how big is the impact, what is the data that is impacted, etc. But beyond that, it starts to become okay, operations. Like, so the head of operations is involved. And it's a conversation around what do we need to do to keep our folks busy and happy and healthy? Does it present a physical risk to our people? How can we move freight? Like what impact does it have to our customers? We have our executives from customer involved for that very same question. Like, do we need to tell folks? Is there information here that customers are going to care about? And as you know, we proactively share a lot of things. But like it's what are their impacts? I've got Webb Estes involved, right, as the president of the company of like, okay, well, which levers matter here? How much of an outage can you take in this area of the business or that area of the business? And these conversations are not just cybersecurity, it's business resiliency. Cyber is just a
Mhm.
piece of that business resiliency conversation because it also plays into how much do I invest in this platform that 5 people use that doesn't impact our ability to move freight versus how much do I invest in this platform that 7,000 city drivers use on a daily basis to pick up, deliver freight, and provide, accuracy for our customers. Like you invest in those two platforms differently. You also think about cyber for those two platforms differently. And I mean that from a risk perspective, not necessarily what you. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. And
But
so, go
IT
ahead.
has to pick the conversation up, but it's not an IT driven decision, if you will. It is a business driven decision.
And
HR is
your
involved.
job is to support the business.
Yep.
Okay. So, you know, I know you called me and said, "Hey, you guys really need to do this." Which was for me, it's like, okay, now I've got the industry specifically asking for it. Let's move fast. So we've set it up. There's a lot of excitement, but we're seeing a bit of a tendency to really start to enter information. And Ben and I have talked and said, hey, it's not just the ones that are successful, but it's the unsuccessful attempts also. How do you think we could get folks to make sure that, hey, you signed up for it now, make sure you're engaged in it? And again, it's not just the bad actors that get through, but it's the bad actors you stop. And it can't be all of them, right? I've worked for some big companies and you get 1,000 attempts a day. No way you're going to do that. So how do we get people to enter the content? Then how do you determine what to put in the portal versus what not to put into the portal?
Yeah, and I would say, Joe, we're like, even as one of the folks that participate, right? Like, we're probably still trying to figure that out ourselves. Because to your point, like, it's not an exaggeration for me to say, not incidents, but we get millions of alerts a week, right? Like, at one point, I think Webb forwarded me an article
Mhm.
where Jamie Dimon was quoted as talking about billions of cybersecurity alerts, and I was like, he's got to be exaggerating. I'm like, no, no, he's not. Like, because I'm like, we get, a couple million a week, and their financial services much larger, very exposed, have lots of valuable data, like, etc. So trying to sift through that and figure out what's valuable and what's not can be difficult, right? The stuff I would want to share is the near successful attempts, the things that got through some layers of security, right? Because cybersecurity is a multi-layered approach. You do it in that way because like they breach something, they don't get to everything, so to speak. So if
Mhm.
there's an area where they've actually exploited something or got close to exploiting something, those sorts of things, that tends to be more of what I target my teams to share, as opposed to the everyday everything that we see. Like, because to your point, I don't know, we block 800,000 emails a month, and that number's really old, so it's probably double that by now. If I started reporting those, I turn your portal into garbage, right? Because everybody's like, yeah, no kidding, people send spam. I got it. Like, so it's trying to find those things that are valuable. And for now, I think it's a judgment call. Um, and I think at this point, we're still trying to build participation. So any participation is good as we kind of overcome some of those legal, reputational, privacy types concerns that people have about these types of portals. But yeah, the short non-answer answer to it is it becomes a judgment call of like, hey, could this be a problem for somebody else?
Right. And you had mentioned social engineering. Talk about some of the things that have happened, things that we got to make sure are in the threat portal, related to social engineering that just really scares you.
Oh, well, I will tell you after the start of the things in the Middle East, it's a good time blocker. I couldn't tell you cause and effect. But there was a Monday that we had threat actors using voice agents that sounded American, and in some places, people calling employees, impersonating the service desk, telling them their Microsoft licenses had expired, and here's the thing that you need to download, and blah, 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 blah. At the same time, we had threat actors calling the service desk, impersonating employees, saying this doesn't work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, trying to gather information. We have text messages and emails going out reportedly from Web Estes saying, hey, I'm coming to visit your terminal today, and I'd really like to hand out some gift cards to a bunch of drivers, right? Like, can you go to Walmart and get gift cards, take pictures of them, and send them to me so that I know you have them because they want to get the numbers off the card and use cards, right? Like, we had folks impersonating Estes employees on LinkedIn, trying to build out networks and map out the organization. We had people impersonating me, sending emails to people in IT, right? And you think you're like, oh my God, is Estes not doing anything to stop any of this stuff? I'm listing to you all the things that I know, right? Like, so clearly we do our best to stop all those things, but we're also a company that interacts with the public, right? Like, you asked me to come do a webinar. I'm not that hard to find, right? Like, guessing my email address probably isn't all that hard because trust me, the sales emails that I get alone would tell me that. And then on top of it, I'm doing a video chat with voice.
Yep.
So impersonating me isn't all that hard either, right? And we're seeing that. Like when I said in some instances, people calling, in some instances, they're leveraging AI. You know, it used to be simple. Hey, if the grammar's bad, if they speak poorly, if they have a thick accent you're not used to, like all of those things were red flags. A lot of those things don't happen anymore. Like people will get phone calls that sound like me. And I don't mean like my cadence, I mean sound like me because they
Right.
recorded my voice, fed
Your
it into an
voice.
AI, and for all intents and purposes, I'm now calling the service desk. So you have to put things in perspective. You have to layer your security differently, and you've got to train your folks, right? Particularly like if you think of an LTL carrier, we have docks, we have service centers, right? The service centers are open. People can walk up on docks, people can walk into offices, people can do those things. And what we tell our folks is what they used to say in the credit card industry, right? If you got a phone call about fraud, which they don't call anymore, but if you got a phone call about fraud on your credit card, they would tell you, hang up, call the number on the back of your card, and get our customer service group, right? We tell people exactly the same thing. Like, we're not going to ask you to click on links. We're not going to ask you to download stuff. We're not going to ask you for your usernames and passwords. We're not going to ask you for social security numbers. We're not going to like this whole list of things we won't ask you. If anyone does, just hang up and call our service desk, call our employee success management line, right? Like, and we do that because we're like, you've now called us. You called a number you know, and no one on my staff is going to get mad at you when you're like, hey, I'm not sure it's legit. I'm going to hang up and call back in, right? And it's just to provide those layers and that awareness. And then, most of our employees deal with the public. So you have to have all the conversations about um, USB drives and things you find and don't plug in personal devices to the network and all of those sorts of things. So it becomes a constant conversation and a constant partnership with everybody in the business to be able to try to prevent that stuff. But you name it, we've probably seen it. And I'm not kidding, that one Monday morning, like they tried all of them at once. So it becomes a constant conversation with our folks.
And
Unfortunately, we'll have to be skeptical of everything.
I know, and it's amazing how they use LinkedIn to map out your org chart. I mean, we're a small organization, so our org chart's not as complicated. But I know I believe it was yesterday, our finance person got an email that said, "Hey, Joe had authorized this new leadership course. Here's how you pay for it. It's whatever $1,500." So they weren't after a big chunk of change, and it even had what sounded like a leadership course. And she's like, "Hey, did you do this?" I'm like, "No, I know the policy, or not the policy, but I know the process. I don't skip the process." And I mean, it looked legit. There weren't misspelled words. They knew the org chart. They name dropped somebody else. And it's like, wow, these they're getting really, really good. So
Oh,
Todd,
we
we
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say we partnered with LinkedIn at one point because at any given time, and I'm actually looking right now, you could have gone on to LinkedIn and there were 50 directors of operations at Estes Express Lines that all worked out of Southern California, that had all been here for 5 years, that were all relatively young women, largely from Eastern Europe.
Yeah, it's
None of
just
them Estes employees.
and
Like,
and
and
I
they're
think
trying to connect and map out the org.
yeah, and I think that's another big lesson learned. You know, a lot of people blindly accept LinkedIn. Don't. You know, I
Yeah.
know I don't. I tell my team that too. If I don't care if they're connected to 10 other people, don't look at their title. If you don't know them, don't connect to them, right?
Right. I
So
had I
we
had I had one the other day on the personal side, right? Being
Mhm.
a relatively public person, trying to recruit me for some CIO role somewhere. And I'm like, there's no way, right? Like as you're digging through it, there's link here and go look at this job. Like like they try to find those areas where they think you're vulnerable, right? Like
Right.
approve a thing, keep the dollar amount relatively low. Oh my God, if somebody's looking for a job, they're going to try to exploit that. Like those are the unfortunate things. Those are the things that we have to be skeptical of.
Right. So Todd, we've only got a few minutes left. So I do want to take a minute to tell people how to get to the threat portal if you do want to join the threat intelligence network. You can go to nmfta.org, and that's our homepage. And if you see that, you'll see a new and very improved website. And if you go to uh, that, what you'll see then is headers, and those headers are different cores. And if you go under standards, you'll go to cybersecurity research. And one of the first things under cybersecurity research is the threat portal. And so, yeah, you do need to give your information to sign up for it, but you'll be able to see everything that's in there. So, again, I'm sorry, it's under cybersecurity resources. So, if you go to nmfta.org, go under standards, cybersecurity resources, you'll see the threat portal. You'll also see newsletters, resources, and things like that. So we really do want people to sign up for this so that you can get more information. You can also email both Ben and I. Um, our information is there. Or, please respond to this panel and ask us questions. We've had a lot of discussions about why the threat portal, why it's important. But we really, again, this is a team sport, and the only way we're going to beat this is a team sport. So
Yeah.
Todd, I really appreciate your time. Um, also want to talk about Long Beach. So Long Beach is September 29th to October 1st, and that is our next yearly conference. Um, Todd, I believe, will be there speaking, and we're going to cover not only non-enterprise, asset, enterprise, but we're also going to spend a lot of time talking about cyber-enabled freight fraud. So please register now for our conference in Long Beach.
Yeah, and I would say all of that information is great. You guys have done a great job on the
Thank
website.
you.
And just to short circuit Joe a little bit for those that like he gave you the full path, you can just go to nmfta-threatportal.com
Yes.
directly and get there that way. And the more information we all share, I think the stronger and better we can all be. So
All
thanks for
right.
having me, Joe.
Yeah, Todd, thanks as always for joining. Hopefully Ben's got that or that electric bill paid and he'll be able to join us next time. But appreciate everybody joining. Please reach out if you have any questions. Todd, thank you again. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, guys.